There's still a month until the NBA trade deadline, but the Wizards have struck early to acquire Trae Young from the Atlanta Hawks in exchange for CJ McCollum and Corey Kispert. No draft picks were sent by either team. Trae Young, aka Ice Trae, is 27 years old, and you know the resume. Four-time All-Star, one-time All-NBA. He's led the league in assists, and now he reunites with his former GM Travis Schlenk, who is in the Wizards front office. And the Wizards have a point guard to pencil in with a lineup that could someday soon look like this. Trae Young at point, Trey Johnson at the two, Bilal Coulibaly at the three, Keyshawn George at the four, and Alex Sarr at the five. So he fits in pretty nicely in that regard. But Bijan, what are your initial thoughts on the trade?
Chase, my first thought was just the fact that the progression of what the Wizards have done under the current front office is pretty remarkable. When you think about they started off with Bradley Beal and his no trade clause, turned him into Chris Paul for like 6 minutes, turned that into Jordan Poole, into CJ McCollum, into a prime Trae Young. That's a pretty amazing asset management, I think. And Trae is in the smack dab middle of his prime. He's 27 years old, doesn't turn 28 until September, the defending NBA assist leader, and he is the point guard that the Wizards have needed and wanted for a long time. And I think he'll fit into this rotation pretty well as soon as he gets here, whenever he starts playing.
Yeah, so this year Trae Young has only played in 10 games. He's averaging about 19 points, 9 assists. He's shooting 41.5% from the field and 30% from three. Those numbers are down from his career stats. His career averages are very impressive: 25 points per game, 10 assists per game, about a steal per game, 43% from the field, 35% from three. There are some interesting selling points on paper. You mentioned he's 27. And it's not like his best days are objectively behind him. He was an all-star each of the past 2 years. So he has a slow start to this season, and the Hawks decide to move off on him very quickly. But it's not like it's been this drop off that has gone on for 4 or 5 years. And as you mentioned, he is in the middle of what should be his prime. I've seen studies where the average age of an all NBA player throughout league history is between 27 and 28. So he,
Mhm.
in theory, could be peaking soon despite the numbers not being what they were a couple years ago. And I'm not saying just completely ignore that, but it is worth noting. So I want to go through this deal with our usual segment. We call it 3 points. So, Bijan, what's your first thought on this move?
My first thought, Chase, is how Trae Young affects the development of the Wizards' young core. And I want to start with Alex Sarr. I truly don't think you could have picked a better point guard, a better player to pair with Alex Sarr, because Alex Sarr has not played with a true honest to God point guard really in his career yet. You know, Jordan Poole was here last year. He is more of a shooting guard by nature. He played point guard last year, and this year CJ and Bub have kind of been sharing that role. Trae Young is a great player who can open up space on the offensive end for the Wizards and enable Alex Sarr to kind of operate in the pick and roll effectively. And I want it to be reminiscent of John. I know we reference this all the time on this show, but I want it to be reminiscent of John Wall and Marcin Gortat in those in the heyday of DC basketball. So Alex Sarr should be doing backflips right now that he's going to get to play with Trae Young in the DC backcourt. But then how does it affect the development of Bub Carrington, Keyshawn George, Trey Johnson, and those guys? I think that's something to really monitor, because if Trae Young slides into this rotation at the one, does that move Bub Carrington to a more permanent off-ball role at the two, or can he be the backup point guard for this team going forward? How does Trey Johnson enjoy the added space that Trae Young will open up for him? Does he move to more of an off-ball role, or can he still move on ball? And then Keyshawn George, is he going to be an off-ball wing, or is he going to continue to take some of the ball handling reps coming up the court in transition? It'll all be fascinating to see.
I love the Wall Gortat reference. That's great. You mentioned Trey Johnson and the added spacing. Not only could their backcourt have two guys by the name of Trey, but they're both known for making deep threes. So that could
Yeah.
be fun to watch, right? But specific to the point on Sarr, he's really the X factor in this
Mhm.
move for me, because if you look at Atlanta's roster and consider, okay, why didn't it work with Trae Young? They actually have a pretty decent supporting cast to kind of mitigate some of his weaknesses, right? They got a ton of size on the wing, more size than the Wizards do.
Mhm.
They've got Dyson Daniels next to him in the backcourt. As good as Bilal Coulibaly is, Dyson Daniels might be the best point of attack defender in the league. So they have all that. They have shooting, but they don't have a guy like Alex Sarr, right? They don't have a lob threat like Alex Sarr, and someone who I think more important than that can protect the rim like
Mhm.
Alex Sarr. So hopefully that could bring out the best in Trae Young. And when it comes to the fit on the roster, fans and media have pointed out the well-documented defensive issues. You're adding him to a team that already struggles at that, especially at the point of attack. He's also undersized. That doesn't really fit
Mhm.
what the front office has said they want. But he does fit the timeline, I think, a lot better than people realize. So year 4 is next year for the Wizards in terms of this rebuild. And that's usually when rebuilding teams get off the runway, right? The
Mhm.
Rockets, Magic, Cavs, I think those were fairly successful rebuilds. All those teams won 40 plus games in year 4. The Pistons and Sixers, meanwhile, would be examples of teams that took 5 or 6 years that were a little bit behind schedule, right?
Mhm.
The Thunder would be an example of a team that was ahead of schedule. They won 40 plus games in year 3. So, this trade, in terms of bringing in a guy his age and of his makeup, um, I think could have been very well timed in the offseason and it would have been more obvious. You got to
Mhm.
worry about the protected pick, obviously, and how he affects that. But just because it would have been a natural timing in the offseason doesn't mean it isn't smart for the Wizards to act early, be nimble, and not wait too long so that they could risk losing him to another team. So I think Trae comes in at a perfect time to help the Wizards potentially go for a postseason berth next year.
Yeah, that's a great first point to make. And another thing that kind of folds into that point, that's also my second point, is Trae Young is is on a contract where he has a player option for next year for $49 million. Let's say he opts into that and he remains a Wizard next year. The Wizards and Trae Young, both sides of this agreement are in no way handcuffed to each other for long term. So they could decide, all right, let's give Trae Young an extension. Let's keep him here. Let's have him be the point guard that will take us through the rebuild to that next era of when we want to start competing for the Eastern Conference, right? So that's an option. That's option one. Option two would be Trae Young might not even want to opt into his player option. He could still explore the trade market before and after next season and see what happens there. And then in that case, the Wizards can try to flip him for more assets, or they could keep him around and then see how he continues to develop the young guys. And another thing with that $49 million player option, keep in mind that the Wizards in no way are in financial jeopardy with this move. Okay, they still have upwards of $80 million to play with next offseason without Trae Young opting into his player option. If he does opt in, that still leaves them with, I think, on the books about 45, 46, somewhere in that 45 to $50 million range of free agent money to spend. That's a lot of money that you can still use to make a huge splash in free agency. So the fact that his deal might be scary on paper in the sense that he has a $49 million cap hit next year. Whether or not he opts into that or not remains to be seen. The Wizards are still extremely cool when it comes to their financial flexibility heading into next year. So that's why I think one of the reasons they made this deal was because of the fact that they can do it on a low risk move where he's not going to hamstring the franchise one way or another.
Yeah, I think they bought low on a guy that obviously has a great pedigree. And you made a lot of really good points there. And I think the leftover money this offseason is one that has to be, well illustrated to fans because this offseason, again, going back to the timeline, that was when the Rockets and the Pistons and those teams started to add veterans to plug holes around their young guys,
Mhm.
right? So you still have some money to do that. You can evaluate what your roster looks like with Trae Young and realize what are you missing if you want to go for, maybe the play-in next year or something.
Mhm.
But in terms of his fit on the roster, we can quibble with the defense, we can quibble with the efficiency. One thing he's definitely going to help them with is getting into the paint and drives per game. That's his best skill, you might argue. Maybe aside from passing, obviously he's a great passer, but this relates to that. His ability to get into the paint is pretty special. So he's one of the best players in the league at doing that. And the Wizards struggle in that area. They're tied for 19th in the NBA in drives per game this year. They're 25th in paint touches per game. Now, this season for Trae, I mentioned only 10 games. It's a small sample size, and his drives per game are down considerably. Only 10 per game, which has him out of the top 50 of the league. But it's usually a strength. So even though he's down, averaging 10 per game, the guy who leads the Wizards roster is Keyshawn George at 9 per game, right?
Mhm.
So last year, Trae was fourth in the league in that category, 17 drives per game. And he's been top 10, I mean, as far back as you can look. At his peak in like 2020, 21, he was like third in the league in drives per game at about 20 per contest. Now, what's really interesting is we think like, okay, does Trae Young fit the Will Dawkins, Michael Winger mold? Not in terms of positional size, not in terms of defense, but what has been a trademark of the Thunder for a very, very long time. They always have not just one of the best player in the league at driving into the paint. It was Russell Westbrook for a very long time, and now it's been Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for several years running. Trae Young is one of the best in the league at doing just that. So in that sense, he is a very good fit for how the Wizards want to play if they want to model some of what Oklahoma City has done for a very long time.
Yeah, Chase, when I was taking my notes preparing for this episode, I don't know if you can see, I wrote paint touches in all capital letters right here because I was very excited about the fact that the Wizards finally have a guy who makes his money, who makes his $49 million off of getting into the paint. It's the one thing that the Wizards have struggled in the most offensively, as you mentioned, these past few years. And if you have a guy like Trae Young who can get into the paint, and you have a dead-eye flamethrower of a shooter in Trey Johnson who can just wait outside and catch and shoot. That'll be an amazing part of his development, even though I do think Trey Johnson is really, really good on ball. We'll see what that can do for him. And then with guys who maybe struggle a little bit offensively, like the Bilal Coulibaly's of the world, who can be reserved to an off-ball role because of the fact that they're paired with someone who's so good at getting into the paint. That'll be really good for Bilal and take a little bit of the burden off of him offensively. So I think that'll be really good for his development as well. And fourth in drives per game last year for Trey Young is an amazing stat. So that'll just open up so many different things for the Wizards on the offensive end. And another thing to mention is that the fact that the Wizards retain their entire defensive makeup, right? Because CJ McCollum and Corey Kispert, for how gifted they are offensively, were for the most part negative defenders. So if you retain the Keyshawn Georges, the Bilal Coulibalys, the Justin Champagnes, the Jamir Watkins, you retain, and the Alex Sars, obviously, you retain your entire defensive identity, and then you bring in a guy who scores 25 points a game and is the defending NBA assist leader. I think that's an amazing part of this deal for the Wizards. And then going into my third point related to that topic of what they gave up, Corey Kispert being shedded by the Wizards is very interesting because you do give up a little bit of shooting. In obviously that's his biggest strength, but getting rid of some of the wing depth on this team makes for a very interesting rotational shakeup, which is my third point. Will Riley is in the wing room for the Wizards now. Jamir Watkins, Justin Champagnie, all these guys. Keyshawn George obviously is going to get minutes one way or another. Cam Whitmore, if he comes back healthy this year or next year, whatever it may be, he's going to be in that mix as well. So, what do the Wizards do on the wing now? Now that Kispert's gone, can we see more minutes for these guys post trade deadline? And I think that'll be the biggest thing for guys like Will Riley who want to earn their minutes. I was just at the Go-Go game this week where Will Riley, after 24 hours after playing for the Wizards, played for the Go-Go and dropped 33 points and was absolutely lethal against the Motor City Crews. So he's way too good to be in the G League. He
He's
will
beating
get
that
NBA.
level. Like a
Yeah,
video game metaphor here, he's beating that level.
he's beating that level. He's absolutely graduated onto the NBA ranks. Like you can tell when a player's too good for the G League, and Will Riley is too good for the G League. But he's going to be in that mix now to have more minutes for the Wizards on that wing room, along with all the other guys I mentioned. So getting rid of Kispert does open that up a lot for different guys on this team.
Yeah, trading Corey Kispert and CJ McCollum, one thing that strikes me about it is the Wizards are dealing two of their best three-point shooters, and they have made encouraging progress in that area. And it's possible they take a step back moving forward for the rest of the season because Trae Young again, he's shooting 30% from three this year. Both of those guys were shooting above 39%. CJ McCollum was their best volume three-point shooter. And you may have seen a stat circulated recently on Twitter that the Wizards are one of the best teams in the league at making threes against close defense this year. That is entirely because of CJ McCollum. He's been the best three-point shooter in the league against
Mhm.
defenders within 4 feet. He's shooting over 50% on those plays, and he's made more threes like that than the rest of the Wizards roster combined. That
Mhm.
said, I think specifically with Kispert, because he was more part of the long-term outlook, the Wizards, I think they're going to be okay when it comes to three-point shooting. And I'm not saying they're dealing from a position or an area of depth, but they do have a lot of young
Mhm.
guys who are showing promise in that area. Trey Johnson, Bub Carrington, Keyshawn George, all three of them are some of the best young shooters in the league, right?
All around
And
40% from three, which is crazy.
yeah, exactly. And we've talked about how Trae Young could open up more opportunities for them. So I think they're okay parting with Corey Kispert, but it is going to be something to watch next year because three-point shooting has become one of the most important factors to deciding wins and losses in the NBA. And if you were showing progress and then you take a step back, you're going to have to replace that somehow. But I think what we've seen from Trey Johnson recently shows that that guy's shooting is legitimate, and you don't
Mhm.
necessarily feel like you're going to miss three-point shooting with him in the rotation.
Yeah, you're not. And you and I are big fans of CJ and Corey. We actually had Corey on the show earlier in the season, so we're sad to see him go. But
He was
when you
great too.
yeah, he was great. He's great. He's a great dude, and so is CJ. But you do lose a veteran presence on this team. Obviously, the longest tenured Wizard in Corey Kispert is now gone, and now it's Anthony Gill. So shout out AG. But this 3-point shooting on this team does remain. Like Trae Johnson is going to continue to make that his biggest strength. Bub Carrington's progression from three this year has been one of the most unexpected surprises, and it's been amazing this year to see him shoot. He's around like 45, I think, percent. Maybe he's down to like 43 now from three this season. So that development has been really, really good for the Wizards. And I agree, you shed some of that, but you're really not losing the ability to shoot the three ball from outside. Then you add Trae Young, who's a volume shooter. He's going to get 20 field goals up per game, maybe 25. But he is still going to score 25 points a game, and a lot of that's going to come from deep threes. So the Wizards' range now has been expanded basically to the half court line.
Yeah, it's interesting. You mentioned the veterans leaving.
Mhm.
This team is getting a little bit younger. CJ McCollum, 34 years old. Trae Young comes in at 27. Corey Kispert is 26. He's out the door.
Mhm.
So Chris Middleton remains as sort of like the lone elder statesman in
Mhm.
terms of a longtime NBA veteran. He's 34. Then you have Anthony Gill at 33 and then Marvin Bagley at 26. So this team is pretty young. And I think that veteran core, I wonder how that will shift after the trade deadline. They're probably going to make more moves. Maybe they bring in another guy who can help that cause. I'm sure they'll be
Mhm.
evaluating that as they lead up to the trade deadline. But the Anthony Gill thing is pretty funny. He's now the longest tenured Wizards player and the only guy remaining from when Michael Winger and Will Dawkins took over this team and
Mhm.
began their rebuild in 2023. And I feel like you could have polled 1,000 people at that moment in time, and not a single person would have predicted Anthony Gill is the last guy left.
Shout out AG. He's a locker room presence. That's the reason you keep him here, so that when you bring in young guys, he's able to ingratiate them into the team. So shout out AG. That's pretty incredible.
Credit to him, too. I'm not
Yeah.
saying that as a negative. Like, I think once you piece it together, you're like, I could see why they kept him. He's
No,
such
he
a great
knows that. Like he
example.
knows that that's why he's still in the league is for being that guy. So shout out AG. We got to have him on the
Yeah.
show soon.
Oh, we have to. Yeah, absolutely. And we'll ask him about just that.
Yeah, definitely.
He's the one with the corporate knowledge. So, and it's funny. Wes Unseld Jr., he used to be the head coach of the Wizards. I did a story on Anthony Gill. It was like early in his career about how he was like everyone's favorite teammate.
Mhm.
And Wes was like, as soon as AG calls it quits as a player, I'm going to offer him a job as coach. So like
Yeah.
he's a player and he's a veteran player, but he brings a lot more than just what he does on the court. All right, that'll do it for this episode, a bonus episode of Off the Bench.
The
We'll
first
see what the
emergency podcast we've done on the show. It's pretty cool.
That's right. That's right. And maybe there'll be more in our future. Speaking of the future, we'll see what that holds now with Trae Young as a
Mhm.
member of the Washington Wizards. I want to say, if you liked our analysis of this move, make sure you check out other episodes of Off the Bench. We just had sit down interviews with Trae Johnson and Will Riley. We have recent interviews with guys like Devin Booker, Julius Randle, like exclusive interviews. Both those guys talked about Trae Johnson. Lots of great stuff on recent shows. I really feel like we're hitting our stride. So make sure you download and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find us on the Monumental Plus app and YouTube, Monumental Sports Network's YouTube page. And that will do it for this episode. For Bijan Todd, I'm Chase Hughes. Thanks for watching, everyone.